Hi guys, Miss Horman back again. And today we're going to do three very, very interesting and very different kinds of art in contemporary. This is the kind of art that often when people say, I don't like modern art, this is the kind of art where I'm like, but have you seen this? Uh, and this is a day of art that is fun and cool and different. And I'm just gonna scroll through really quickly. We get There's no crying allowed in the barbershop, which is all this cool kitschy stuff. We get corned beef or Pisupo Lua Afe, and we'll talk about him. He's adorable. And then finally, we get electronic superhighway, which is amazing. And so we will look at these three really, really cool pieces today and talk about them. Um, this is literally my favorite day of teaching contemporary art because the three of them are so different and so cool and so um, contemporary and so appropriate to our everyday modern lifestyle that we live now. Modern with a small m, not modern like time period. And I just love them. So en la barberia no se llora, which means there's no crying allowed in the barbershop. Pepon Osorio from 1994. And so clearly this is a mixed media installation. There's so much stuff going on here. So Osorio was born in Puerto Rico, and he lives in New York City. He's a social worker. And what's really amazing about Pepon Osorio is that he really appeals to what they call the Nuyorican audience, which is a section of Manhattan that is particularly populated with people who are from Puerto Rico or descended from people who are Puerto Rican. And what's great is all of his artworks, even once he became famous, are always premiered in what he calls the Nuyorican galleries, the art galleries in that area of New York City. And he shows them there first, and then they go on to larger venues. He could clearly start with all of his work now in large museums and large venues, but he always starts at his roots and lets them show there for a little while, and then he goes. This is a very, very large installation. It's a room that's 30 feet by 25 feet. It's very large. And its job is to recreate what he calls the center of Latino male culture, which is the barbershop. And these are his words, not mine. And he believes that that's really where Latino men from his neighborhood go to talk and to share ideas and to have fun and to do all of the things that make men men. And so, what he wanted to do with this exhibit is he wanted to question or challenge the viewer to question issues of that come up culturally that we wonder how they're addressed. Things like identity. How is your identity established? Are you required to have a certain identity when you are in this culture? Masculinity. Is this intense masculinity part of your Puerto Rican, Hispanic, Latino identity? It doesn't have to be. What is the impact of your culture on who you are, and what is the impact of this identity and masculinity and culture on your attitudes towards things around you and other people? And so it starts very simply with the title. There's no crying in the barbershop. That starting from a young age, the barbershop is a very masculine place. And so when boys come to have their hair cut, there's no crying. This is not a hair salon. This is not for women. This is a men's only kind of place. And so what you're looking at is a place that Osorio says helps to formulate the Latino identity. He says that it was inspired by his very first haircut that he remembers that was actually in Puerto Rico. And he felt that shop that he and his family returned to when he was growing up, when they would go back to visit family, was very it was very masculine. It was filled with, and this is his quote, intensely packed with masculine symbols. Um, he talks about, when he talks about his art, the concept of machismo, that strong sense of masculine pride that is often associated with. There are certain cultures where machismo is such an underlying thing. This male pride. Um, uh, so he also talks about these things that are called chucharias, which are Spanish trinkets and knickknacks and little things like that, and how those are part of the Mexican identity, that you see them in the houses of your elders and things like that. And so what he wants to look at is he wants the viewer to look at the the cultural clashes that happen and the rites of passage that happen when you are a Latino man, and to look at these all these, and here we come back to that word, all these kitschy items, these consumer items that help to um, you know identify what you believe, these kitschy items that help to establish your stop these kitschy items that help to establish your belief system, and so um, so let's look at some of the things that we see. So we start with, and I'm going to scroll a little bit here. Here's a different view of it. So I love this view. So we start with, here's a barber chair and here's a barber chair. And in the head of the barber chair, there are video screens in the headrest. And these video screens are men playing soccer, men playing other baseball, men being very tough and playing, sports, and speaking very loudly, babies being circumcised, like this very male things. You have pictures of very important Latino men lining the walls. Pardon me, mother, forgive me, mother, with the flowers, the very soft, and the bullets. The floor is like that sort of old 1950s kitschy floor. You have these pink walls, again, very 1950s, old barber's chairs. And so you see these symbols, but then as we scroll in, here's kitsch again, and social conventions. So we scroll in and we take a good look at one of the chairs, and you can see here's the background, here's the torso, men are expected to look a certain way. Here are, picks for your hair and baseballs, so many baseballs, Puerto Rican flags and flip-flops and shells, and just things for Day of the Dead, things that are part of your cultural identity. Often the lace, Mexican lace that's hanging here. Also, when we see it here's again more famous Latino men, hubcaps from their cars, sports trophies. We see more chairs, and then we see the pool table. This is a different floor. Yeah, this is a secondary installation, but we still are seeing the same thing. These chairs with the heads rests, and the pictures of men, and the pictures of masculine things, and baseball, and the Puerto Rican flag, and this whole concept that everything is meant to be meant to be very manly. And he wants you to question, like, is that the right thing to do? Should we start this so young? Should children be held to these very strict masculine standards? Are we expecting too much? Are we pushing these cultural ideals on children who are in a changing culture? He wants you to ask all those things. And he wants you to look at all those things, and he wants you to take the images that you see and think to yourself, if you were the owner, what tone are you setting? If you are a customer, what are you falling into? If you are a parent who brings your small child, what are you instilling in them? And and I believe a lot of it is impacted by the fact that, as a profession, he was a social worker, and he wants people to look at like sort of the cultural identity and the influence on behavior that that cultural identity would have. And you also have to think about time period wise. 1994 was a very difficult time. Um, uh, in both California and New York, because there's a lot of gang violence, and many of the gangs were populated um, mostly by minorities. So you were dealing with Spanish, African American gangs in California and in New York, and lots of, East Coast, West Coast rivalries. And I know that that sounds crazy, but it really was part of what was going on at the time. Tupac Shakur and Biggie Smalls and the Crips and the Bloods and all of these things that were part of what was going on in society at the time. And he was questioning how much of that is instilled in children at a young age. It's a really solidly wonderful exhibition, and I really like it. And it's a thinking exhibition. You really have to think about, what you're looking at and what he's asking you to question. Then we move on to this next piece, which makes people go, "What the heck am I looking at?" And then I tell you, you're looking at a bowl made out of tin cans, and so it is wonderful, and I love it. I'm so sad that we didn't get to it before. Uh, Final projects are due, because I have always hoped that someone would make me some cool animal out of some tin can thing. I mean, clearly not this big. I mean, look at how tall it is. It's sort of 45 inches tall. It's ridiculous, but wonderful at the same time. So Michael Tuffery was born in New Zealand. So he is what we call an oceanic artist. He was born in New Zealand. His family is from Samoa, the Cook Islands, and Tahiti. He has a very, very strong interest, obviously, then in Polynesian heritage and Polynesian history. And so Pisupa Lua'afe, corned beef. So why the cans? We're going to talk about that in a second. So this is a life-size sculpture of a bowl made from flattened cans of corned beef. And what's really cool about this is in the feet, there are wheels that can be locked and unlocked so that it can be moved around, and then it has a sense of movement to it. But what's really cool is that when they're locked in place, you can't see the wheels. It's very cool. So we have to do a little explanation of what we're looking at. But we have to talk about our artist first. Of course we do. So our artist, Michael Tuffery, when he was young, he did not read, write, or speak until he was 6. And his family had him in all kinds of therapy, and he used art as his way to communicate. And so for him, art is not just art. Art is about communication. Art is about teaching a story. Art is about telling a story. Art is about making things clear that you're not making clear with words, you're making clear with pictures. He often says that many of his works are aimed at children to engage them in the art, to pique their curiosity, to get them interested in whatever topic it is he's talking about, to inspire them to be creative, to inspire them to do certain actions, like be involved in the ecology and recycling and naturally grown crops and all that stuff. And we're gonna come back to what that is all about. But let's talk about the fact that he sees art as a way of talking to people without using words. So what is Pisupo Lua'afe? Pisupo is canned meat. And we have to understand a basic concept here, is that when you live on an island in Polynesia, it is very difficult for you to get meat, like beef, steak, stuff like that. There's not land for them to raise large crops like this. So having these kinds of food was not something that was part of the typical Polynesian diet until there were certain things that began to happen, which is for special occasions, there was often a time when meat, canned meat, would be given as a gift. And because it was expensive and it was rare at the beginning. And so if you could order in these cans of beef, they were good for gift giving because it wasn't something that you had uh, quick access to, and that was fine for a while. But then came the concept of lots of trade, and this went from being a special occasion item to being something that was imported more often and eaten more often, and began to have and does have a very negative impact on Polynesia in a bunch of different ways, and that's what Michael Tuffery is talking about. So now that corned beef, and you can see look at the can. Here's the label, and here's the bottom, and both the bottom and the top that he uses to create this. And so he flattens out the cans, and he puts them together to make up this bowl. Once canned corned beef was able to be imported, it led to a lot of problems that are still being experienced in Polynesia. Ms. Horman, what do you mean? How can importing corned beef from Australia or other places have a negative impact? Well, because when you can import canned meat anytime you want, as opposed to having it as for a special occasion, if you can import it anytime you want, then it leads directly to a decrease in the traditional skills of fishing. The importation of canned and dried meats begins to have a huge impact on the Polynesian diet. There is a loss of traditional cooking of many traditional Polynesian foods. There is a loss of the traditional skills of fishing, but more importantly, it brings with it a couple of problems. When canned meat was openly or more readily accessible, the rate of obesity and heart disease in Polynesia skyrocketed. Because people were no longer having to work as hard for the food that they were eating. And the food that they were eating was not as healthy. They were eating canned, processed meat as opposed to fresh fish from the ocean. So it leads to an obesity problem. But even one more from that. I mean, look at all the stuff. We're dealing with loss of fishing. We're dealing with loss of traditional skills. We're dealing with loss of traditional cooking. We're dealing with loss of traditional agriculture, because now we don't have to, grow as many of this, that, and the other thing, because we can import, canned, smoked, dried, whatever from other places. And so what ends up happening is this also causes a huge ecological issue, because these are small islands. They're small island nations. Trash disposal is very difficult for them. And it becomes like this, what do we do with all this stuff? It becomes a recycling nightmare. It becomes a trash nightmare. And so what you're dealing with is, as you're importing all of this stuff that comes in all of these containers, the things that you could be eating that could have been naturally growing, that don't need all the processing, you're ignoring those and taking all this. So it becomes a health concern. It becomes a tradition concern. It becomes an ecological concern. He really talks about the fact that, and sometimes I read you a quote, and I think this is really important. Is it coincidental that significantly increasing health and dietary problems among Islanders occurred during the same time that premium fishery catches are being exported, and at the same time that we have experienced the explosive growth of canned and imported products flooding into the Pacific? So even when they are fishing, they're fishing and to other places and they're importing stuff that's not as healthy. And this is sort of what he's talking about, is that the idea that you rely on other people for your food, you then lack what is frequently referred to as what is called food sovereignty, where now you're so dependent on this imported food that you actually couldn't support yourself because you haven't grown the right crops, because everything that you're doing, you're growing for exportation, and you have lack of importation, and if something happens so that you have lack of importation, then you lack food sovereignty. So he really does want you to think about all of these things as you are looking at this bowl made out of these corned beef cans. And so you have the wires that show, the bull being held behind. Here's a cool little ring in his nose, and that you can attach a thing, and then you can pull him. In some installations, he can be pulled. And you have this, bulls have soft, hides, and here you have these cans that are sharp and could cut you. And so it just points out to you that maybe these cans are not as good for you as possible. That maybe that you need to back off from that. And so he has this one, Supalua Afe, canned meat from the bull, from the cow. And then he also has a really cool one about fish, which is the same sort of thing. Why, if you are Polynesia, would you import canned fish? Just use your own fish. It is a man who is trying to engage children, who is trying to put together artwork that tells a story, and do it in a way that will make people curious and hopefully remember what he's saying, and possibly do something different. So I'm a big fan of Michael Teferi. I think corned beef is very cool. And then the final one for today, which I also think is very cool. Miss Horman, you say very cool all the time. Well, I told you today was my day of just stuff that I think is just so different and out there and cool. So today's my day. So this piece is Electronic Superhighway by Nam June Paik. And from 1995, mixed media installation. And when we're talking mixed media, we're talking really mixed media. 51 channel closed circuit videos. There's 51 separate channels playing on this. It has neon, and has steel, and has electric components. But really, it's what is so cool about this guy is like the neon sets aside what you're looking at, which is the map of the United States, and the video is really cool, and there is sound, very minimal sound coming out of it, and you see 51 channel closed circuit. So 51 channels, there's only 50 states, yeah, but there's Washington D.C. too. And so what you have is Nam June Paik came up with this map of the United States that includes, off to the side, I'm going to go over here, Alaska and Hawaii, and also a little like teeny, tiny, right, like DC up there. And so what you're looking at is on each state, the thing that's playing in that state is something that is representative of that state. So, for example, the OC is playing over here in California. For example, in Kansas, what is that movie with Judy Garland? The Wizard of Oz is playing. So what's interesting about this piece is, Nam June Paik is a Korean-born artist who now lives and works in New York City. And when this was first shown, it was originally shown in New York. And the camera, there's a camera. And the camera that points at the viewer would then show, when it was showing in New York, would show on the state of New York. But it's not in New York anymore. Its permanent installation is at the Museum of American Art, the National Museum of American Art, which is in DC. It's connected to the National Portrait Gallery. And so when you go and look at this piece, there's a camera that records you, and you show up in that little tiny, teeny, tiny TV that shows DC. You are actively involved in this piece. It's really, really cool. Like I said, you've got all 50 states, including Alaska and Hawaii, which are off to the side to show that it's separation from the contiguous, as we call it, contiguous United States. Each state has that different video feed, so that's why there's 51 channels, and each channel is particular to its place. So New Hampshire, we talk about the New Hampshire primary. A lot of times there's stuff that happens. There's like sometimes there's political stuff showing in New Hampshire, and in Louisiana. There's pictures of like Mardi Gras celebrations. In Hawaii, there's shots from the TV show Hawaii Five-0. So there are a total of 313 TV monitors. Some, have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 TVs. Some have one. DC only has one little tiny TV because it's a little teeny tiny DC. But each state has a feed, and as I said, the viewer is participatory in this piece. Namjoon Pike said that as a child he was fascinated by maps and by travel and by interstates and by the highway system, and so he created this sort of chopped up map of the United States, but he included the neon for a very interesting reason, which is when you look at it, the neon sort of shines at you and it's bright and it catches your attention. And he wanted you to really think about the old Route 66 that went across America and had all these cool like old diners and restaurants and hotels and all the stuff that would have had like the neon signs of hotels and motels as you drive across the nation. Namjoon Pike is often called the father of video art. This piece was created for the 1993 Venice Biennale. And so, he wants you to think, because all of these pieces that are contemporary are thinking pieces. He wants you to think about how technology impacts our culture, how technology impacts how we interact with each other, how the accessibility to this much technology could possibly lead us to information overload. How do we know how to process everything that we're looking at? And how do we know what we should pay attention to and what we shouldn't? And how, if we're overwhelmed by all of this sound and light and pictures and information and stuff, how do we know what to pull and what to look at? And so he really wants you to think about, what are you looking at, and what importance should you give to it? And he wants you to contemplate that big question, which is, what is the impact of technology on who we are and what we believe? Because we are now living in an electronic superhighway. This was huge in 1995. And let me explain to you why. And I try to give this as an example every year so that people understand where we were with the internet and sort of stuff like that. In 1995, I enrolled in George Washington University to get my master's degree. And one of the courses we had to take was understanding the internet. And one of our main projects, and I really want you to contemplate this for a second, one of my huge projects for a graduate level education course was to find 100 websites that you could go to that would have information on it that would be in any way, shape, or form helpful educationally. And finding 100 educationally sound websites was a project that we worked on all semester. So in 1995, we're at the beginning of the internet. We're at the beginning of, the World Wide Web and websites and using the internet. And he's asking serious questions. What impact is this going to have on us? I would love for him to talk about this piece now versus how he saw it when it was created. He does continue to make pieces, but I would love for him to make a comment about what he thinks about electronic superhighway in 2020 versus what he thought about electronic superhighway in 1995. Yeah, so this is, again, when we're looking at it, mixed media, new media for his time. He's, like I said, the father of video art. And it is really it was a huge, big deal when it was created. And when you go to see it at the Museum of American Art, this is what it looks like. You walk in and you stand in front of it, and Alaska and Hawaii are over here, and there's like a little camera over here, and you show up in the DC slot, and it's really, really cool. So that is the end of today's pieces. Today we did No Crying in the Barbershop, and we did Pasupo Lua Afe, or corned beef, and we did the electronic superhighway. So that's the end of contemporary video number 5. And I'll see you again in a little bit for contemporary number 6.